The meeting room fell silent as 15 million euros changed hands across the mahogany table. Weapons shipments. Territory negotiations. Power plays that would reshape the entire southern coast. At the head of the table sat Damiano Moretti, one of Italy's most feared mafia bosses. His steel-gray eyes betrayed nothing. His tattooed knuckles rested against the polished wood, the words honor e sang catching the dim light. Then his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Something made him answer. A trembling voice spoke. Mr. Moretti, this is St. Gabriel Hospital. The room went still. There's a woman here. She's fighting for her life. Damiano's jaw tightened. The nurse hesitated. She keeps losing consciousness. Pause. Every time she wakes up, she keeps saying your name. For the first time in years, the most feared man in Italy forgot how to breathe. Before we begin, thank you for being here with me tonight. Whether you're listening during a quiet evening at home on a long drive, or settling in before sleep, I'm truly grateful you've chosen to spend this time together. Tonight's story is one that will stay with you long after it ends. Please like, share, and subscribe. And comment below where you're watching from so I can see just how far across the world this story has reached. Now let's begin today's story. The phone felt like lead in Damiano's hand. Around him, 12 of Italy's most dangerous men sat frozen, watching their leader with expressions that ranged from confusion to barely concealed alarm. No one had ever seen Damiano Moretti react to anything. Not when rivals threatened his empire. Not when bullets flew past his head. Not when he buried his own father 3 years ago. But now. His olive-toned face had drained of color. The steel-gray eyes that could make grown men confess their deepest betrayals were suddenly unfocused, distant, as if staring at something no one else could see. Mr. Moretti? The nurse's voice crackled through the phone. Are you still there? His throat worked but no sound emerged. Marco Bellandi, his right-hand man of 15 years, slowly pushed back his chair. The scar over his eyebrow caught the light as he leaned forward, every protective instinct screaming that something had gone catastrophically wrong. Sir, the nurse continued, her voice gentle but urgent, I understand this must be a shock. But she's in critical condition. The doctors are doing everything they can but... She paused and Damiano could hear the weight of what she wasn't saying. She keeps calling for you. Even when she's barely conscious. Your name is the only word she says. Elena. His Elena. The name echoed through his mind like a gunshot, shattering the carefully constructed walls he'd built around his heart over the past 6 months. Where? His voice came out as a rasp, barely recognizable even to himself. Where is she? St. Gabriel Hospital. The emergency ward. 3rd floor. She was brought in approximately 40 minutes ago. There was an accident. Damiano was already moving. The chair scraped back with a violent screech that made several men flinch. His black tailored suit jacket hung perfectly on his broad shoulders as he stood, but his hands, those hands that had killed without trembling, were shaking. Damiano. Marco was on his feet, dark eyes sharp with concern. What's happened? But Damiano couldn't answer. Couldn't form the words that would make this nightmare real. Instead he strode toward the door, his 6'4" frame cutting through the room like a blade through silk. The meeting, one of the associates started, is over. Marco's voice brooked no argument. He was already following Damiano, pulling his phone from his pocket. Everyone out. Now. The door slammed open and Damiano was in the corridor, his Italian leather shoes echoing against the marble floors of his compound. The security team stationed outside the meeting room jumped to attention, but he barely saw them. All he could see was Elena. Elena with her warm hazel eyes and her soft dark hair. Elena who smiled at him like he wasn't a monster. Elena who had believed, once, that there was something worth loving beneath the violence and the blood. Elena who had walked out of their home 6 months ago because he'd finally proven her wrong. Get the car. His voice was ice but beneath it something was cracking. Now. The compound erupted into controlled chaos. Guards scrambled, engines roared to life and within 60 seconds, Damiano was sliding into the back of the black Mercedes, Marco beside him. St. Gabriel Hospital, Marco ordered the driver. Break every law you need to. The car tore out of the gates and Damiano stared straight ahead, his knuckles white against his thighs. The tattoos on his forearms seemed to pulse with each heartbeat. The Roman gladiator holding a broken shield, the Italian cathedral surrounded by black roses. Symbols of strength. Survival. Family. Family he had failed. Talk to me. Marco's voice was low, measured. In 15 years he had never seen his boss like this. What did they say? Elena. The name was a wound. She's at the hospital. Critical condition. Marco's intake of breath was sharp. What happened? An accident. They didn't. Damiano's voice broke and he had to force the words through clenched teeth. They didn't give details. Just that she's fighting for her life. The words hung in the air like poison. Fighting for her life. And the only name she kept saying was his. We'll get there, Marco said, his hand briefly touching Damiano's shoulder. She's strong. You know she's strong. But Damiano wasn't listening. He was remembering. The first time he saw Elena, she was standing in the rain outside a cafe in Florence. He had been 29 years old, already building the empire that would one day make him untouchable. She had been 21, a university student studying art restoration, with paint beneath her fingernails and an umbrella that had turned inside out from the wind. He was laughing. Actually laughing at the disaster, her dark hair plastered to her face, her hazel eyes bright with amusement at her own misfortune. Damiano had stopped walking. Just stopped, right there in the middle of the street, because in 30 years of life he had never seen anything so purely, unashamedly beautiful. He offered her his umbrella. She declined. I'm already soaked, she said, grinning up at him. What's the point? He offered to buy her coffee instead. He said yes. And for the next 8 years, Elena Conti, later Elena Moretti, became the only person in the world who could make Damiano feel like a man instead of a monster. She knew what he was. He never lied to her, never softened the reality of his world. On their third date he told her plainly, I am not a good man. I have done things that would horrify you. And I will do more. She had looked at him for a long moment, her hazel eyes searching his face with an intensity that made him feel stripped bare. Do you want to be better? She asked. I don't know if I can be. That's not what I asked. He had stared at her, this woman who should have run, who should have been terrified, and he told her the truth. When I'm with you, yes. I want to be better. She reached across the table and took his hand. Then that's enough. For now. They were married 2 years later in a private ceremony on the Amalfi Coast. She wore white silk and he wore a black suit that cost more than most people made in a year. When he slid the ring onto her finger, his hands were steady. When she said, I do, something in his chest, something that had been cold and hard and dead for years, finally started to thaw. For 6 years Elena was his anchor. His conscience. His reason to come home. She never asked him to stop being who he was, but her presence made him want to be careful. Made him want to survive. Made him want to be worthy of the way she looked at him every night when he walked through the door. And then, he destroyed everything. 5 minutes out. The driver's voice cut through the memory. Damiano blinked, realizing he had been staring at the passing city lights without seeing them. Rome blurred past the windows, but none of it registered. All he could see was the way Elena's face had looked 6 months ago, standing in the doorway of their bedroom with a suitcase in her hand. I can't do this anymore. Her voice had been steady, but her hands were shaking. She had been crying, he could see the traces of tears on her cheeks, but she wasn't crying now. Now she just looked tired. Defeated. Elena. He had been sitting on the edge of the bed, still dressed from the meeting that had run 4 hours late. The meeting that had been preceded by another meeting. And another trip. And another week where he barely saw her for more than a few minutes at a time. Put the suitcase down. We can talk about this. We've been talking about this for 2 years, Damiano. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Or rather, I've been talking. You've been agreeing. And then nothing changes. Things will change. I'll make time. When? The word cracked like a whip. When, Damiano. When the territory disputes are settled. When the alliance negotiations are finished. When the weapons shipments are complete. She shook her head, and for the first time he saw something worse than anger in her eyes. He saw resignation. There will always be something more important than me. There will always be another meeting, another crisis, another reason you can't be here. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I used to be your anchor. Now I'm just something you come home to when there's nothing else to do. That's not true. He stood reaching for her. Elena, you know that's not true. You're the most important. Then prove it. She stepped back out of his reach. 1 week. Give me 1 week where I come first. Where you're actually present. Where I'm not competing with your empire for the scraps of your attention. He had hesitated. 1 second. 2. 3. He saw it. Saw the calculation in his eyes, the mental review of his calendar, the weighing of obligations. The suitcase hit the floor. 6 years, she said softly. 6 years of loving you. And you can't even pretend for 5 seconds that I matter more than your next meeting. Elena. I'm going to my sister's. Don't follow me. Don't call me. Don't. Her voice broke and she pressed a hand to her mouth. Just give me time. Please. I need time to figure out if there's anything left worth saving. She left that night. And he let her go. Because he was Damiano Moretti and he didn't chase. He didn't beg. He gave her space because he assumed, with the arrogance of a man who had never lost anything he truly wanted, that she would come back. He always came back. But 6 months passed and she didn't come back. And he was too proud, too afraid, too goddamn stubborn to go after her. The hospital loomed ahead, its fluorescent lights cutting through the darkness like a wound. The Mercedes hadn't even fully stopped before Damiano was out the door, striding across the parking lot with Marco close behind. His long black overcoat flared around him and people scattered from his path. Whether from recognition or pure instinct, it didn't matter. The automatic doors slid open and he was hit with the smell that all hospitals share, antiseptic and fear and the thin, sterile edge of death. Sir, you can't. A security guard stepped forward. Damiano's steel-gray eyes fixed on him and whatever the man saw there made him step back. 3rd floor. Damiano's voice was barely human. Emergency ward. Now. He didn't wait for directions. He was already moving toward the elevator, punching the button with enough force to dent the metal. The doors opened and he stepped inside, Marco following. The ride felt like an eternity. She's going to be okay. Marco's voice was quiet but firm. She's the strongest woman I've ever met. She survived being married to you for 6 years. Don't. Damiano's jaw clenched so hard Marco could hear his teeth grinding. Don't make jokes. Not now. Marco fell silent. The doors opened onto the 3rd floor and Damiano was moving again, his eyes scanning the corridor for any sign of where she might be. Nurses looked up as he passed, their faces registering surprise, recognition, fear, but he paid them no attention. Then he saw her. Dr. Sofia Romano. She was standing outside a room at the end of the corridor, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, a clipboard in her hands. When she looked up and saw Damiano approaching, her expression shifted from professional calm to something more guarded. Mr. Moretti. She stepped forward to meet him, positioning herself between him and the door. I'm Dr. Romano. I've been treating your wife. Where is she? It wasn't a question. She's in this room. But before you go in, there are things you need to understand. Move. Mr. Moretti. The doctor's voice sharpened. I understand you're frightened. I understand you want to see her. But if you go in there without knowing what you're walking into, you won't be able to help her. And right now she needs help. Something in her tone cut through the haze of panic. Damiano stopped, his chest heaving, and forced himself to focus on the woman in front of him. She was calm. Professional. Not intimidated by who he was or what he represented. And her eyes, brown, intelligent, compassionate, held none of the fear he usually saw in people. Tell me. His voice cracked on the words. Tell me what happened. Dr. Romano nodded, gesturing for him to step aside with her. Marco took a position by the door, his eyes scanning the corridor for threats out of pure habit. Your wife was brought in approximately an hour ago, the doctor began, her voice low and measured. She was in a car accident. Single vehicle. Her car went off the road and into a ravine about 20 kilometers outside the city. Damiano's blood turned to ice. A passing motorist saw the wreckage and called emergency services. By the time they extracted her from the vehicle, she had been trapped for an estimated 30 minutes. 30 minutes. Alone. Injured. Dying. Her injuries are severe. Dr. Romano's expression softened slightly. Multiple fractures including several ribs and her left arm. Internal bleeding which we've stabilized but are monitoring closely. A concussion and there's some swelling in her brain that we're watching carefully. Each word was a knife. She's unconscious most of the time, which is the body's way of protecting itself while it heals. But when she does surface. The doctor paused and something flickered in her eyes. When she does surface she says your name. Over and over. Like she's searching for you. Damiano's hand went to the doorframe, steadying himself. The tattoo on his neck, Il destino non perdona, seemed to burn against his skin. Destiny never forgives. Can she hear me? His voice was barely a whisper. If I talk to her, will she know I'm there? We believe so, yes. Studies suggest that even unconscious patients can register the presence of loved ones. Can help stabilize their vitals. Give them something to hold on to. Then let me in. Dr. Romano studied him for a long moment. Whatever she saw in his face, the desperation, the terror, the love he'd spent 6 months trying to bury, seemed to satisfy her. 5 minutes, she said quietly. Then we need to run more tests. I'll be right outside if you need me. She stepped aside. And Damiano Moretti, one of the most feared men in Italy, walked into the room where his wife lay dying. Nothing could have prepared him for this. Elena, his Elena who was always moving, always smiling, always filling spaces with warmth and light, lay motionless in the hospital bed. Machines surrounded her, beeping and humming with the rhythm of her survival. Tubes snaked across her body and bandages covered wounds he couldn't see. Her face was pale. So pale. Bruises darkened her cheekbone, and there was a cut along her hairline, held together by thin strips of medical tape. Her dark hair spread across the pillow limp and dull. But she was breathing. He could see the gentle rise and fall of her chest beneath the thin hospital blanket, and he clung to that movement like a drowning man clings to a rope. Slowly, as if approaching a wild animal, Damiano moved to her bedside. His legs felt like they might give out at any moment, but he forced them to carry him forward until he could reach out and touch her hand. Her fingers were cold. Elena. Her name came out broken, shattered on the edges. Elena, I'm here. No response. Just the steady beep of the heart monitor, the soft hiss of the oxygen, the mechanical symphony of survival. Damiano lowered himself into the chair beside her bed, never releasing her hand. His other hand came up to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch impossibly gentle. I'm so sorry. The words tore out of him raw and jagged. God, Elena, I'm so sorry. For all of it. For every time I wasn't there. For every time I chose something else over you. For letting you walk out that door. His vision blurred and he realized with distant shock that he was crying. He couldn't remember the last time he'd cried, couldn't remember if he ever had, not since childhood. I should have come after you. His voice was thick, choked. The moment you left, I should have followed. I should have gotten on my knees and begged you to give me another chance. I was too proud. Too stupid. Too goddamn scared to admit how much I needed you. He pressed her cold fingers to his forehead, his shoulders shaking. Please don't leave me. Please. I know I don't deserve you, I've never deserved you, but please, Elena. Stay. Stay and let me prove that I can be better. That I can be the man you believed I was. The machines beeped on, indifferent to his pleas. And Elena didn't wake. Marco was waiting when Damiano finally emerged from the room. One look at his boss's face told him everything he needed to know. In 15 years, through gunfights and betrayals and buried bodies, he had never seen Damiano Moretti look so utterly destroyed. She's stable, Damiano said, his voice hollow. For now. What do you need? It was the right question. Not empty condolences, not meaningless reassurances, just a simple offer of action. This was why Marco had survived so long in Damiano's inner circle. He understood that men like them showed loyalty through deeds, not words. I need to know what happened. Damiano's eyes hardened, the grief giving way to something colder. More dangerous. The doctor said it was an accident. Single vehicle. Her car went off the road. You don't believe it. Elena is one of the most careful drivers I've ever known. His hands clenched at his sides, the knuckle tattoos stark against his skin. She doesn't take that road at night. She doesn't drive fast. And she doesn't lose control. Marco's expression shifted subtly. You think someone. I don't know what I think. But I want to know everything. Where she was coming from. Where she was going. Whether anyone was following her. Whether her car was tampered with. Damiano's voice dropped to a lethal whisper. And if this wasn't an accident, if someone did this to her, I want names. I'll make calls. Do it quietly. I don't want anyone knowing we're asking questions. Not yet. Marco nodded and stepped away, already pulling out his phone. Damiano turned back to stare through the window of Elena's room. A nurse was inside now, young with brown hair and gentle features. She was checking Elena's vitals, adjusting the four, making small notes on a chart. This must be the one who called him. The one who heard Elena saying his name. As if sensing his gaze, the nurse looked up. Their eyes met through the glass, and she offered a small, sad smile before returning her attention to her patient. Mr. Moretti? Dr. Romano's voice drew his attention. She had returned, her clipboard still in hand, her expression professionally neutral. The test came back. The brain swelling hasn't worsened, which is encouraging. Her internal bleeding has stopped, and we're cautiously optimistic about her recovery trajectory. But the doctor hesitated. Recovery from this type of trauma is rarely straightforward. Even if her physical injuries heal, there can be complications. Memory issues. Emotional changes. Psychological trauma from the accident itself. She'll live. It wasn't a question, it was a demand. Barring unforeseen complications, yes. We expect her to survive. Dr. Romano met his gaze steadily. But survival is just the first step, Mr. Moretti. True recovery will take time. Patience. Support. She'll have whatever she needs. I hope so. The doctor's voice carried an edge. The nurse tells me that Mrs. Moretti's emergency contact was her sister, not you. That she hasn't had any visitors except family since moving to a new address 6 months ago. Damiano's jaw tightened. Your point. My point is that whatever happened between you isn't my business. But her welfare is. And if your presence is going to help her heal, I'll support it. But if you're going to cause her more stress, I would never hurt her. You already have. The words were quiet but unflinching. She cries your name in her sleep like a woman whose heart has been broken. That kind of pain doesn't come from nowhere. For a moment, Damiano just stared at her. This small, fearless woman who dared to speak truth to one of Italy's most dangerous men. And he realized, with a twist of bitter irony, that she reminded him of Elena. You're right. His voice was rough. I hurt her. More than I ever intended. And if she wakes up and tells me to leave, I'll leave. But until then, his eyes went to the window again, to the still form in the bed. Until then, I'm not going anywhere. Dr. Romano studied him for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. There's a waiting room down the hall. I'll have someone bring you updates every hour. And Mr. Moretti? He looked at her. Talk to her. Even if she can't respond. Let her know you're here. Sometimes that's the thing that brings people back. She walked away, leaving Damiano alone with the rhythmic sound of machines and the weight of his own regrets. 3 hours passed. Damiano didn't leave the chair beside Elena's bed. He talked to her, softly at first, then more openly as the night wore on. He told her about the meeting she'd interrupted with that phone call. Told her about the stupid territorial disputes that had seemed so important just hours ago. Told her that none of it mattered. None of it had ever mattered, not compared to her. He told her about their first date, when she'd ordered the most expensive wine on the menu just to see how he'd react. Then laughed when he told her he'd have bought the entire vineyard if she'd asked. He told her about their wedding day, when he'd been so nervous that Marco had to physically stop him from wearing a hole in the floor of the church. He told her about the night she'd fallen asleep on his chest after they'd danced in their living room to an old Italian song, and he'd stayed awake for hours just listening to her breathe because he couldn't believe she was real. And he told her he was sorry, over and over, for the missed dinners, the cancelled plans, the empty promises, the way he'd let his empire consume everything, including the only person who made it worth building. I got lost, he whispered, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. Somewhere along the way I forgot why I was fighting so hard. It wasn't for power. It wasn't for money. It was for you. So I could give you everything. So I could protect you from everything. But I got so focused on building walls against the outside world that I didn't notice I was shutting you out too. The heart monitor beeped steadily. The oxygen hissed. And Elena slept on. Around 4 in the morning Marco returned. His face was grim as he stepped into the room, and Damiano knew immediately that he had found something. Talk. Damiano didn't release Elena's hand. I spoke to the first responders who pulled her from the wreck. Marco kept his voice low, his eyes flicking to Elena's unconscious form. They said something was wrong with the scene. Wrong how? The car didn't just go off the road. It accelerated. Like someone floored the gas pedal right before the curve. Damiano's blood ran cold. Elena would never. I know. That's what made them suspicious too. Marco pulled out his phone, scrolling through photos. I got a contact in the police department to send me pictures from the scene. The brake lines were cut. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Someone tampered with her car, Marco continued, his voice hardening. This wasn't an accident, Damiano. This was attempted murder. For a moment everything went still. Then Damiano released Elena's hand and stood. When he turned to face Marco, the grief was gone from his eyes. In its place was something far more dangerous. Something that had destroyed empires. Who knew where she was living? Not many. She kept a low profile after leaving. Stayed with her sister for a few weeks, then rented an apartment on the edge of the city. No connection to our world. No obvious ties. Then how did they find her? I don't know. But I'm going to find out. Damiano moved to the window, staring out at the city lights. His reflection stared back, the tattoo on his neck stark against his olive skin, his steel-gray eyes cold as death. Vitali, he said quietly. Marco stiffened. You think he's involved? He's been circling for months. Looking for weaknesses. Looking for ways to destabilize me before the summit next month. Damiano's hands curled into fists. What better way to destroy a man than to take the woman he loves? But how would he know about Elena? You've kept your marriage private. Even after she left, you never spoke about it publicly. Someone talked. Damiano's voice was ice. Someone in my organization told him that I have a wife. And that she's vulnerable. The implication settled over them both like a shroud. A traitor. In Damiano's inner circle. I want every person who knew about Elena identified. Every contact they've made in the past 6 months traced. Every financial transaction analyzed. Damiano turned to face his right-hand man, and Marco saw something in those steel-gray eyes that he'd only seen a handful of times in 15 years. Pure, unfiltered rage. And I want Vitali watched. Every move he makes. Every person he meets. If he so much as looks in the direction of this hospital, he won't get near her. Marco's voice was iron. I'll post men on every floor. No one gets in or out without being vetted. Do it. Marco nodded and turned to leave, then paused at the door. Damiano. What? She's going to wake up. And when she does, she's going to need you to be there. Not hunting enemies. Not planning revenge. There. Damiano's jaw tightened. I can do both. Can you? Marco's eyes held a challenge. Because the last time you tried to do both, you lost her. The words hit like bullets. For a long moment neither man spoke. Then Damiano let out a breath and nodded. Find the traitor. Find Vitali's connection. But keep me informed. Don't make moves without my approval. And you? Damiano looked back at Elena, still and silent in her hospital bed. I'll be here. Wherever she needs me to be. Marco left and Damiano returned to his chair. He took Elena's hand again, pressing it to his lips. I won't leave you, he murmured against her cold fingers. Not this time. Whatever's coming, we'll face it together. The machines beeped on. And somewhere across the city, a man named Riccardo Vitali sat in a darkened office, a phone pressed to his ear. Is it done? His voice was smooth, patient, the voice of a man who understood that true power came from precision, not force. The car went off the road just as planned. She's at St. Gabriel Hospital. Critical condition. Vitali smiled, the expression never reaching his cold eyes. And more Eddie? He's there. Hasn't left her side. Perfect. Vitali leaned back in his leather chair, studying the chessboard on his desk. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and toppled the Black Queen. Let him watch her suffer. Let him feel what it's like to lose everything. He hung up the phone and poured himself a drink. The game was only beginning. 2 days passed. Damiano didn't leave the hospital. He slept in the chair beside Elena's bed, ate whatever Marco brought him, and ignored the constant stream of calls from associates demanding his attention. For the first time in his life, his empire came second. Dr. Romano came by every few hours with updates. The brain swelling was decreasing. The internal bleeding showed no signs of returning. Elena's body was fighting, was winning, and the doctor's cautious optimism gradually shifted toward genuine hope. But Elena didn't wake. She surfaced occasionally, fleeting moments of consciousness where her eyes would flutter open and her lips would move. But she never seemed to see him. Never seemed to recognize where she was or who was holding her hand. He just said his name. Damiano. Over and over like a prayer or a curse. And each time he leaned closer, brushed the hair from her face and whispered, "I'm here. I'm right here." But she slipped away again before she could hear him. On the third night, Damiano was alone in the room when his phone buzzed. "We found something. Talk. Your driver. Antonio. He's the one who told Vitali about Elena." Damiano's hand tightened on the phone until the metal creaked. Antonio. The man who had driven him for 8 years. Who knew every safe house, every meeting point, every secret route in the city. Who had been present when Damiano received that devastating phone call 3 days ago. "Are you sure?" "We traced payments to an offshore account in his name. 50,000 euros transferred the week before Elena's accident. The money came from a shell company connected to Vitali's network. 50,000 euros. That was the price someone had put on his wife's life. Where is he now?" "In custody. At the warehouse." Damiano closed his eyes. The tattoo on his neck seemed to burn. "Il destino non perdona." Destiny never forgives. And neither did he. "I'll deal with him later." "What about Vitali?" "He's scheduled to attend a charity gala tomorrow night. Black tie event at the Palazzo. Half of Rome's elite will be there. So will I." "Damiano. He tried to kill my wife, Marco." The words were quiet, but they carried a weight that made the air seem to thicken. "He doesn't get to pretend nothing happened while she fights for her life. He needs to see me. Needs to know that I know. And then he'll learn what it costs to touch what's mine." He hung up and turned back to Elena. In the dim light of the hospital room, she looked almost peaceful. The bruises on her face had begun to fade, shifting from angry purple to mottled yellow. Her breathing was stronger now, less dependent on the machines that had kept her alive those first critical hours. He was coming back to him. Slowly. Painfully. But she was coming back. Damiano reached out and took her hand again, studying the slender fingers, the elegant wrist, the faded tan line where her wedding ring used to sit. She'd stopped wearing it when she left. He still wore his. Had never taken it off, not even during the worst of their separation. It was there now, gleaming gold against his tattooed knuckle, a constant reminder of promises made and broken. "I have to go somewhere tomorrow," he told her softly. "Just for a few hours. There's something I need to do. Someone I need to face." No response. Just the steady rhythm of her heart on the monitor. "But I'll be back. I promise you that. Whatever happens, I'll be back." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her palm. "And when you wake up, everything will be different. I'll be different. I swear it on my life." The next evening, Damiano Moretti walked into the palazzo like a storm given human form. He wore a black tailored tuxedo that fit him like armor, the fabric cutting sharp lines across his broad shoulders. His jet black hair was slicked back, his steel gray eyes cold and unreadable. The tattoo on his neck was barely visible above his collar, just enough to remind everyone present who they were dealing with. Heads turned as he entered. Conversations faltered, then resumed at a whisper. Because Damiano Moretti didn't attend society events. He didn't mingle with politicians and industrialists, didn't make small talk over champagne and canapes. His presence here tonight could only mean one thing. Someone had made a very serious mistake. He moved through the crowd like a shark through water, ignoring the greetings and attempts at conversation. His eyes scanned the room, searching for one face among the hundreds. He found it. Riccardo Vitali stood near the bar, a glass of scotch in his hand, surrounded by sycophants and allies. His silver-threaded dark hair was immaculately styled, his expensive suit perfectly pressed. He was laughing at something one of his companions had said, the picture of confidence and control. Then he looked up. and saw Damiano walking toward him. For just a moment, a fraction of a second, something flickered in Vitali's cold eyes. Fear. Recognition. The dawning understanding that his carefully laid plans had been discovered. Then the mask slammed back into place and he smiled. Moretti. His voice carried across the space between them, warm and welcoming as if greeting an old friend. What a pleasant surprise. I wasn't aware you frequented these events. Damiano stopped 3 feet away. Close enough to speak privately. Close enough to see the pulse jumping in Vitali's throat. We need to talk. By all means. Vitali gestured to his companions. Give us a moment. The group dispersed quickly, grateful for the excuse to escape the sudden tension that had descended over the space. When they were alone, or as alone as 2 men could be in a room full of witnesses, Vitali's smile widened. I heard about your wife. Terrible accident. I was so sorry to learn of it. Damiano didn't move. Didn't blink. No, you weren't. Something shifted in Vitali's expression. The mask cracked just slightly, revealing the predator beneath. I'm not sure what you mean. I think you do. Damiano's voice was soft. Deadly. I think you paid a man named Antonio 50,000 euros to tell you where my wife was living. I think you had someone tamper with her car. And I think you sat in your office drinking your expensive scotch, waiting to hear that she was dead. Vitali's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went flat. Careful, Moretti. Those are serious accusations. They're not accusations. They're facts. Damiano stepped closer, and for all his control, Vitali took a half step back. Here's another fact. My wife is alive. She's fighting. And she's going to survive. How fortunate for you both. Yes. It is. Damiano's voice dropped to a whisper that only Vitali could hear. And here's what's going to happen now. You're going to walk out of this party. You're going to get in your car. You're going to drive home. And you're going to spend every remaining minute of your life wondering when I'm coming for you. Vitali's composure finally cracked. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing with barely concealed rage. You can't touch me, Moretti. I have too many allies. Too many. Allies can be bought. Damiano smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression he'd worn all night. Allies can be turned. And allies can disappear. He reached out and adjusted Vitali's lapel with exaggerated care. But you won't know when. How? Or who's already switched sides. You'll just know that somewhere out there I'm watching. Waiting. And that one day, maybe tomorrow, maybe next month, maybe next year, the debt will come due. He released the lapel and stepped back. Enjoy the party, Riccardo. They won't all be this pleasant. And then Damiano Moretti turned and walked away, leaving Riccardo Vitali standing alone, his hands trembling around his scotch glass, watching his empire crumble behind his eyes. Damiano was back at the hospital within an hour. The rage that had sustained him through the confrontation with Vitali drained away the moment he stepped into Elena's room. She was still there, still unconscious, still breathing that steady mechanical rhythm. But something was different. He felt it the moment he crossed the threshold. A shift in the air. A change in the quality of the silence. Then Elena's eyes fluttered open. And this time they focused. On him. Damiano. Her voice was barely a whisper, cracked and broken from days of disuse. But it was her. His Elena. She was awake. He was at her bedside in an instant, his hand finding hers, his other hand cupping her face with impossible tenderness. I'm here. His voice shook. I'm right here. Her hazel eyes, those eyes that had always seen straight through him, searched his face. Confusion gave way to recognition. Recognition gave way to something else. Something that looked like grief. You came. A single tear slipped down her cheek. You actually came. Of course I came. He wiped the tear away with his thumb. The moment they called me. I was here within 20 minutes. I've been here ever since. She stared at him for a long moment. Then her face crumpled and she began to cry, great racking sobs that shook her entire body and sent the heart monitor into a frenzy. I thought, she could barely form words. I thought you wouldn't, after everything. Shoo. He gathered her carefully into his arms, mindful of her injuries, pressing his lips to her hair. It doesn't matter. None of that matters. All that matters is you're alive. You're here. You're going to be okay. She clung to him with what little strength she had, her fingers digging into his jacket, her tears soaking through the expensive fabric. And Damiano held her like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth. Because she was. She always had been. The next few hours blurred together. Dr. Romano came in to examine Elena, asking questions about her memory, her pain levels, her awareness. Elena answered as best she could, her voice growing stronger with each passing minute. She remembered leaving her apartment that night. Remembered driving toward somewhere. But the accident itself was a blank space, a void where memory should be. That's normal, Dr. Romano assured them both. Traumatic events often get blocked by the brain's protective mechanisms. The memories may return over time or they may not. What matters is that you're awake and responsive. When the doctor finally left, Elena turned to look at Damiano. He was still in his tuxedo, he realized. Still wearing the armor he'd put on to face Vitali. It seemed absurd now, all that posturing, all that threat, when the only thing that mattered was this woman in this bed looking at him with those hazel eyes. "You're dressed up," she said softly. "I had somewhere to be." "Where?" He hesitated, then decided that if there was ever a time for honesty, it was now. "There are things I need to tell you. About the accident. About why it happened." Fear flickered in her eyes. "What do you mean, why it happened?" "It wasn't an accident, Elena." The words came out harder than he intended. He forced himself to soften. "Someone tampered with your car. Someone who wanted to hurt me by hurting you." She went pale. "Who?" "A man named Vitali. A rival. Someone who's been looking for weaknesses in my organization." His jaw tightened. "Someone who found out about you." Elena was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was distant. "So this is because of you. Because of your world." The words were a knife. "Yes." She turned her head away, staring at the ceiling. The machines beeped on, indifferent to the devastation unfolding. "I left because I couldn't live like that anymore," she said finally. "Always wondering when your enemies would find me. Always being the weak point someone could exploit. I left because I wanted to be more than a target or a bargaining chip or a—" Her voice broke. "Or a weapon to use against you. Elena. And the moment I was gone, that's exactly what I became anyway." She laughed bitterly. "I almost died because someone wanted to send you a message. How is that any different from what I was running from?" Damiano reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "I need time." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I need to think. I'm not leaving you. I know." She finally looked at him, and what he saw in her eyes shattered what remained of his heart. "That's what scares me, Damiano. You're not going to leave. And I'm not going to stop loving you. But loving each other has never been our problem." She closed her eyes. "Our problem is everything else." Damiano left the room. Not because she asked him to, she hadn't, not exactly, but because he could see that his presence was causing her pain. And after everything he'd put her through, the last thing he wanted was to add to her suffering. He found Marco waiting in the corridor. "She's awake." Damiano nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Marco studied his face, reading the devastation there as clearly as a written report. "It's going to take time," he said quietly. "You didn't break this in a day. You won't fix it in a day either. What if I can't fix it at all? Then you fight anyway." Marco's voice was firm. "Because that's what you do, Damiano. You don't give up. You don't surrender. You find another way." Damiano leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. The past 3 days, the fear, the rage, the grief, crashed over him like a wave. She said loving each other isn't the problem. "Is it?" "No." A bitter laugh escaped him. "No, we've never had trouble with that. The problem is everything I built to protect her ended up being the thing that almost killed her. Then maybe it's time to build something different." Damiano looked at his right-hand man. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe there's a way to be powerful without being a target. A way to protect her that doesn't involve painting a bullseye on her back." Marco shrugged. "Or maybe there isn't. I don't have all the answers. But I know this. The old way wasn't working. So try a new way." Before Damiano could respond, the nurse, Julia, he'd learned, emerged from Elena's room. "Mr. Moretti? Your wife is asking for you." His heart lurched. "She wants to see me?" Julia smiled gently. "She says she has something to tell you." Damiano straightened, suddenly uncertain. The last time Elena had something to tell him, she'd left with a suitcase. But he walked back into the room anyway. Because she had asked. And he would never again ignore Elena when she asked for him. She was sitting up now, propped against pillows, looking pale but more alert than before. When he entered, her hazel eyes tracked his movement across the room with an intensity that made his chest tighten. Close the door. He did. Sit. He sat. For a long moment she just looked at him. This man she had loved for 8 years. This man who had broken her heart in ways she was still discovering. This man who had left everything to be at her bedside when she was dying. I remember something, she said finally. About the accident. He went still. What? Not the crash itself. But, before. She took a shaky breath. I remember where I was going. Where? Her eyes met his. I was coming home, Damiano. Her voice trembled. I was driving back to you. The words hit him like a physical blow. You were. I couldn't do it anymore. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Being without you. Pretending I could build a life that didn't include you. I tried so hard to move on and I just couldn't. She reached out, and this time when she found his hand she held on tight. I was going to call you from the car. I was going to tell you I wanted to try again. That I was willing to fight for us if you were. A sob escaped her. And then everything went wrong. Damiano couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. All he could do was hold her hand and stare at this woman. This impossible, beautiful, devastating woman, who had almost died trying to come back to him. Elena. His voice cracked on her name. I don't deserve. I know. She cut him off. I know you don't. And I know that nothing has really changed. Your enemies are still out there. Your world is still dangerous. And loving you will probably always feel like standing on the edge of a cliff. She pulled him closer until he was perched on the edge of her bed, his face inches from hers. But I don't want to live without you. I tried, Damiano. For 6 months I tried. And all it got me was a car crash and a hospital bed and the terrifying certainty that if I died, the last thing I'd regret was walking away. You were right to leave. The words hurt to say, but he forced them out. I wasn't giving you what you needed. I was failing you every single day. Yes. You were. Her hand came up to cup his face, her thumb tracing the sharp line of his cheekbone. But I was failing us too. I kept waiting for you to change without ever telling you exactly what I needed. I kept expecting you to read my mind, to prioritize me without me fighting for that space. And when you didn't, I ran instead of standing my ground. You shouldn't have to fight for basic consideration. Maybe not. But marriages don't work on shoulds. Her eyes held his. They work on choosing each other. Every day. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. She took a deep breath. So here's what I'm proposing. 1 month. Give me 1 month where we're completely honest with each other. Where I tell you exactly what I need and you tell me exactly what you're willing to give. And at the end of that month, we decide together whether this can work. 1 month. He repeated the words like they were a lifeline. 1 month. No assumptions. No expectations. Just truth. He thought about what Marco had said. About building something different. About trying a new way. And he thought about Elena, almost dying, driving through the night to come back to him. I want to try. His voice was rough with emotion. God help me, Elena. I want to try more than I've ever wanted anything. She smiled. The first real smile he'd seen from her in what felt like years. Then we try. She tugged him closer and he went willingly, carefully gathering her into his arms. She rested her head against his chest and he held her like she was made of glass. Precious and fragile and worth protecting with everything he had. I'm going to make mistakes, he murmured against her hair. I'm going to fall back into old patterns. I'm going to forget things and prioritize wrong and... I know. Her voice was soft. I'll make mistakes too. I'll expect too much. I'll get scared and want to run. I'll say things I don't mean. So we'll mess up. Constantly. And then... She tilted her head back to look at him. And then we choose each other anyway. 1 week later, Elena was released from the hospital. The paperwork took hours. Forms to sign, prescriptions to fill, follow-up appointments to schedule. Dr. Romano gave them both a long list of instructions. Rest, physical therapy, warning signs to watch for. But finally, Elena was free to go. Damiano wheeled her to the hospital entrance himself, ignoring her protests that she could walk. The doctor said wheelchair to the car. I'm following orders. Since when do you follow anyone's orders? Since the woman giving them saved your life. Elena fell quiet at that. The Mercedes was waiting at the curb and Marco stood beside it, his expression carefully neutral. But when Elena looked at him, he smiled. A rare, genuine smile that transformed his scarred face. Welcome back, Mrs. Moretti. Thank you, Marco. She reached out to squeeze his hand. For everything. He ducked his head, almost embarrassed, and held the door open for her. Damiano helped her into the back seat, painfully aware of how careful he needed to be. Her arm was still in a cast. Her ribs were still healing. Every movement had to be gentle. He slid in beside her and the car pulled away from the hospital. Where are we going? Elena asked. It was a reasonable question. Her apartment? His compound? Somewhere neutral? The villa, Damiano said. On the coast. She turned to look at him. The villa was where they had spent their honeymoon. Where they had retreated whenever his world became too much. Where some of her happiest memories had been made. Are you sure? Isn't that? It's safe. His voice was quiet. I've had Marco's team securing it for the past 3 days. No one knows we're going there. No one will find us. She was silent for a long moment. 1 month, she finally said. 1 month. She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. Then let's go home. The villa rose from the cliff top like something out of a dream. White stone walls. Terracotta roof. Gardens that spilled down toward the sea in a riot of color and fragrance. It had been Elena's favorite place from the moment she first saw it, and Damiano had bought it for her as a wedding gift. Now, as the car wound up the private drive, she felt a complicated swell of emotion. Joy that she was still alive to see it again. Fear that this month would only prove what she already suspected, that some damage couldn't be repaired. And hope. Fragile, terrifying hope. Damiano helped her out of the car and guided her into the house. Staff had prepared everything. The bedrooms were aired, the kitchen was stocked, the gardens had been freshly tended. But Damiano had sent them all away for the duration. This month would be just the two of them. You should rest, he said, leading her toward the master bedroom. The doctor said. I know what the doctor said. Elena stopped in the middle of the hallway, turning to face him. But before I rest, I need to ask you something. Anything. She studied his face, the sharp cheekbones, the steel-gray eyes, the tattoo barely visible above his collar. The man who did this. Vali. What are you going to do about him? Damiano's expression didn't change. What do you want me to do? It was a test. They both knew it. A test of whether he would be honest with her, even about the darkest parts of his world. I want you to tell me the truth. He was silent for a long moment. Then, I want to kill him. The words hung in the air, brutal and unadorned. I want to make him suffer for what he did to you. I want to destroy everything he's built and watch him realize in his final moments that he should never have touched you. Elena's heart was pounding, but she held his gaze. And will you? That depends. On what? He reached out, his hand cupping her face with devastating tenderness. On whether you can live with who I am. All of who I am. Not just the man who holds you at night, but the man who would burn the world down to keep you safe. She covered his hand with her own. I married you knowing who you were, Damiano. I've never expected you to become someone else. She took a breath. But I need to know that the violence has limits. That there's a line you won't cross. That protecting me won't turn you into a monster. What kind of line? She thought carefully before answering. No innocent people. No one who doesn't deserve what's coming. And, she hesitated. And no revenge that puts you in danger. I can't lose you while you're trying to avenge me. He stared at her for a long moment. You're asking me to be careful. I'm asking you to be smart. There's a difference. Slowly, a smile curved his lips. Not the cold smile he showed his enemies, but something warmer. Softer. Genuine. I can do smart. Promise me. I promise. She searched his eyes and found only truth. Okay. She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Then do what you need to do. Just come back to me when it's done. He pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. Always, he whispered. I will always come back to you. That night, Elena slept in the master bedroom while Damiano sat vigil in a chair beside the window. He watched her sleep, the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the flutter of her eyelids in dreams, the way her hand curled around the pillow like she was reaching for something. Or someone. She had almost died. The reality of it hit him anew every few hours, a fresh wave of terror and grief and rage. This woman, this irreplaceable woman, had almost been taken from him because he had been too powerful to hide and too careless to protect. Never again. He would burn Vitali's empire to ash. He would find every person who had conspired against her and make them understand the consequences of their choice. And then he would build something new, something safer, even if it meant dismantling half of what he'd spent his life creating. Because Elena was right. The old way wasn't working. It was time to try something different. 3 days into their month at the villa, the walls began to come down. Not all at once. Not dramatically. But in small moments. A conversation over breakfast, a walk in the gardens, an evening spent watching the sunset from the terrace. They began to find their way back to each other. Elena told him about the 6 months they'd been apart. The loneliness. The regret. The way she'd picked up the phone 100 times wanting to call him, always hanging up before she could. "Why didn't you?" he asked. "Pride." She laughed softly. "Fear. The same things that kept you from coming after me. We're idiots. The biggest." And Damiano told her about his months without her. The way he'd buried himself in work to avoid thinking about her. The way their bedroom had become unbearable, so he'd started sleeping in his study. The way Marco had finally confronted him, telling him he was destroying himself over a woman he was too stubborn to fight for. "What did you say to him?" "I told him to mind his own business." Damiano's lips curved ruefully. "And then I stayed awake all night thinking about everything he'd said." Elena reached across the breakfast table and took his hand. "We have to stop running from each other. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." She smiled. "Look at us. Actually learning. Don't sound so surprised." "I'm not surprised. She squeezed his hand. "Hopeful." On the 5th night Elena woke screaming. Damiano was beside her in an instant, pulling her into his arms, murmuring soft words against her hair while she shook and sobbed. "The car," she gasped. "I remember the car. The pedal, it wouldn't stop, the brakes." "Shoo. You're safe. You're here. I have you." She clung to him, her fingers digging into his shoulders, her heart pounding so hard he could feel it against his own chest. "I thought I was going to die." Her voice was raw. "I could feel the car spinning and I thought, this is it. This is how it ends." But it didn't end. He held her tighter. "You survived. You fought. You're still here. Because of you." He pulled back to look at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "In the hospital. When I was unconscious." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I could hear you. Not your words exactly, but your voice. Your presence. It was like there was this thread connecting us, and as long as I held on to it, I couldn't slip away." His throat tightened. "The nurse said you were saying my name." "I don't remember that. But I remember feeling you. Knowing you were there." She touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "You came for me, Damiano. Even after everything, you came for me. I will always come for you." His voice was fierce. "No matter what happens between us. No matter how much we hurt each other. If you need me, I will be there." He kissed him then. It was soft. A whisper of a kiss, barely more than a brush of lips. But it felt like a promise. Like forgiveness. Like hope. When they finally pulled apart, her eyes were still wet, but she was smiling. "Stay with me tonight?" "Every night." He kissed her forehead. "Every night for the rest of our lives." They lay down together, her head on his chest, his arms wrapped around her. And for the first time in months, they both slept without dreams. 2 weeks passed. Elena grew stronger every day. The cast came off her arm. The bruises faded completely. She started taking longer walks in the gardens, eventually making it all the way down to the cliff's edge, where the sea stretched endless and blue beneath them. And through it all, Damiano was there. He worked from the villa, but differently than before. He took calls in the mornings, dealt with urgent matters before lunch, and then put his phone away for the rest of the day. Something needed his attention after that. Marco handled it. "This isn't sustainable," Elena said one afternoon, watching him end a call earlier than she knew he needed to. You can't neglect your business forever. I'm not neglecting it. I'm delegating. He sat down beside her on the terrace, where she was wrapped in a blanket watching the sunset. Marco can handle most things. And the rest can wait. Can it, though? He turned to look at her, his steel-gray eyes serious. For 18 years I've built an empire. I've conquered territories, destroyed rivals, accumulated more power than most men dream of. He took her hand. And none of it mattered when I thought you were dying. None of it could bring you back. None of it was worth a single second of your life. He was quiet, listening. So yes, Elena. You can wait. Because I'm not going to spend another day treating you like an afterthought. You come first. From now on you always come first. Tears pricked her eyes. Those are beautiful words, Damiano. They're not just words. They're a vow. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. I made vows to you once at our wedding and I broke every single one. So I'm making new vows now. Ones I intend to keep. What kind of vows? He held her gaze. I vow to choose you every day even when work demands otherwise. I vow to listen when you speak even when I don't want to hear what you're saying. I vow to fight for us not just against our enemies but against my own worst instincts. He paused. And I vow to let you in. All the way in. Even the parts of me I'm ashamed of. Elena stared at him, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. Damiano. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to make vows back. This isn't a negotiation. He squeezed her hand. This is just me telling you what I'm committing to. What you can hold me accountable for. What I will do whether or not you decide to stay. She leaned forward and kissed him. This time it wasn't soft. It was fierce. Demanding. A claiming and a surrender all at once. When she finally pulled back they were both breathless. I'm staying, she said. That's my vow. I'm staying and I'm fighting and I'm choosing you too. His eyes blazed with something raw and vulnerable. Even knowing what I am, what I've done, what I might have to do. Even knowing all of that. She pressed her forehead to his. I married a mafia boss, Damiano. I always knew what that meant. But I also know who you are underneath the power and the fear and the violence. I know the man who reads to me when I can't sleep. Who cried at our wedding when he thought no one was looking. Who has spent 2 weeks learning to cook because the staff aren't here and he wanted to feed me himself. A reluctant smile tugged at his lips. The cooking hasn't been going well. It's been terrible, she agreed, laughing. But you kept trying. And that's what matters. She pulled back, holding his face in her hands. I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be present. To show up. To keep trying even when it's hard. I can do that. Then we're going to be okay. She kissed him once more, soft and sweet. We're going to be better than okay. That night, after dinner, which Damiano had managed not to burn, they sat together in the living room, a fire crackling in the hearth despite the Mediterranean warmth outside. Elena was curled against Damiano's side, her head on his shoulder, when she finally asked the question that had been haunting her for days. What's happening with Vitali? Damiano's arm tightened around her almost imperceptibly. Marco has been handling things. What kind of things? He was silent for a long moment. Then, we've been slowly dismantling his network. Turning his allies. Disrupting his supply chains. Making him understand that there's a cost for what he did. Elena processed this. But you haven't confronted him directly? Not yet. His voice was careful. I wanted to wait until you were stronger. Until I could be fully present when I dealt with him instead of rushing back to you. And what happens when you do confront him? He looked down at her, his steel-gray eyes unreadable. What do you want to happen? She thought about the car spinning out of control. The terror of knowing she was about to die. The weeks of pain and fear and recovery. I want him to understand that he made a mistake, she said finally. I want him to know that targeting your family has consequences. I want... She paused, surprised by the ferocity in her own voice. I want him to be afraid. The way I was afraid. Damiano studied her face for a long moment. You've changed. Almost dying does that to a person. She met his gaze steadily. I used to think I could stay separate from your world. That as long as I didn't know the details I wasn't complicit. But that was naive. I'm your wife. Your enemies will always see me as a target. So I need to stop pretending I'm not part of this. That doesn't mean you have to become like me. No. But it means I have to stop being passive. She sat up, turning to face him fully. I want to know what you're planning. I want to be consulted. Not because I need to approve your decisions, but because I refuse to be kept in the dark anymore. He reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. That's a dangerous path, Elena. Once you know, you can't unknow. I know. She caught his hand, holding it against her cheek. But I'd rather face the darkness with you than hide from it alone. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then Damiano nodded. Hey, I'll tell you everything. Every plan, every move, every risk. His eyes held hers. But in return you have to promise me something. What? If it ever becomes too much, if you ever need to step back, to not know, to have distance, you tell me. Immediately. No shame, no judgment. You just tell me and I'll protect you from it. She smiled. Is that your version of a safe word? If you want to call it that. Then yes. I promise. She leaned forward and kissed him. Now tell me about Vitali. Over the next hour Damiano laid out everything. The €50,000 payment to Antonio. The shell company that connected to Vitali's network. The slow, methodical process of turning Vitali's allies, cutting off his resources, isolating him from everyone who had once supported him. By the time I confront him directly, he'll have nothing left, Damiano explained. No allies. No weapons. No escape. He'll know that everything he built has crumbled and he'll know why. And then I'll give him a choice. Damiano's voice hardened. Leave Italy. Surrender his remaining assets. And never set foot in my territory again. You're not going to kill him? Not unless he forces my hand. His jaw tightened. Despite what you might think, I don't enjoy killing. It's a tool, not a pleasure. And making Vitali live with the knowledge of his complete defeat. That's a punishment worse than death for a man like him. Elena nodded slowly. And if he doesn't take the deal? Damiano's eyes went cold. Then he'll leave me no choice. The finality in his voice sent a chill down her spine. But it wasn't fear, not anymore. It was understanding. This was who her husband was. This was the world she had married into. And she had made her choice to stand beside him in it. When? She asked. Soon. Within the week. He searched her face. Are you okay with that? I'm not okay with any of this, she said honestly. But I understand why it's necessary. And I trust you to handle it. Something shifted in his expression. Gratitude maybe, or relief. Thank you. For what? For trusting me. He pulled her close. For not running. For being willing to see me, really see me, and stay anyway. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I told you, Damiano. I'm not running anymore. 3 days later, Elena woke to find Damiano already dressed. He was standing at the window, his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in rapid Italian. She caught fragments, coordinates, timing, confirmation, and knew without being told what was happening. Today was the day. He ended the call and turned to find her watching him. I was going to wake you, he said. I felt you leave the bed. She sat up, pulling the sheet around her. Is it time? Yes. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed beside her. Marco's team has confirmed Vitali's location. He's at his estate alone except for a skeleton security force. Most of his men have already abandoned him. You're going now? Within the hour. He took her hands in his. I should be back by tonight. Tomorrow morning at the latest. She studied his face, the hard lines, the steel-gray eyes, the barely visible tattoo on his neck. Il destino non perdona. Destiny never forgives. Be careful, she said. I mean it, Damiano. Be smart. Come back to me in one piece. I promise. He kissed her, deep and thorough, like he was trying to memorize the taste of her. I love you, he murmured against her lips. I should have said it more. I should have said it every day. You can say it every day when you get back. I will. Another kiss. I love you, Elena. More than my empire. More than my power. More than my own life. I know. She touched his face. Now go finish this. And then come home. He stood, straightening his jacket, black tailored, the uniform of a man going to war. I'll call when it's done. I'll be waiting. He was at the door when she called out. Damiano. He turned. I love you too. For a moment, just a moment, the hardness in his face cracked and she saw the man beneath. The man who had cried at their wedding. The man who had held her through the nightmares. The man who had chosen her over everything. Then the mask slid back into place and he was gone. The hours that followed were the longest of Elena's life. He tried to read. Tried to walk in the gardens. Tried to eat something even though food tasted like ash. But nothing could distract her from the knowledge that somewhere, right now, her husband was confronting the man who had tried to kill her. Late afternoon turned to evening. Evening turned to night. No call. No text. Nothing. Elena sat by the window watching the driveway, her heart in her throat. What if something had gone wrong? What if Vitali had been prepared? What if Damiano was hurt, or worse? She couldn't lose him. Not now. Not after everything they'd been through. Not when they'd finally found their way back to each other. Headlights appeared on the drive. Elena was on her feet before she could think, racing through the villa toward the front door. She flung it open just as the black Mercedes rolled to a stop. The door opened. And Damiano stepped out. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, tension in every line of his body, but he was whole. Unhurt. Alive. Elena didn't remember crossing the distance between them. One moment she was in the doorway. The next she was in his arms, clinging to him like she would never let go. It's done, he murmured against her hair. It's over. Vitali. Gone. He took the deal. By morning he'll be on a plane to South America with nothing but the clothes on his back. The relief was so overwhelming she nearly collapsed. And you? You're okay? I'm fine. He pulled back to look at her, brushing the tears from her cheeks. I told you I'd come back. I keep my promises now. She laughed, a wet, broken sound that was half sob and half joy. You better. Because I have plans for you. Plans. Hum. She took his hand and started leading him inside. Starting with never letting you out of my sight again. I think I can live with that. They walked into the villa together, the door closing behind them on the darkness outside. For the first time in months, maybe years, the future felt possible. And Elena Moretti intended to fight for every moment of it. 1 week later, Elena woke to the smell of coffee and something burning. She found Damiano in the kitchen, scowling at a pan that had clearly betrayed him, smoke billowing toward the ceiling. I was trying to make breakfast, he said defensively. I can see that. He tried not to laugh. What was it supposed to be? Eggs. Those are not eggs. Those are crimes against poultry. He threw the pan in the sink with a clatter. I'll have Marco bring something. Or, she moved past him, pulling ingredients from the refrigerator. You could let me teach you. Properly this time. They spent the next hour making breakfast together. It was a disaster. Flour everywhere, eggshells in the batter, a smoke alarm that went off twice. But by the end of it they were both laughing so hard they could barely stand. And when they finally sat down to eat their lumpy, misshapen pancakes, Elena realized something. This was what she'd been fighting for. Not grand gestures or dramatic promises. Just this. Mornings in the kitchen, laughter over burnt eggs. The quiet joy of being present with the person you love. What are you thinking? Damiano asked, watching her across the table. That I'm happy. The words felt strange on her tongue. Unfamiliar after so long. Actually happy. For the first time in a long time. He reached across the table and took her hand. Then let's make sure it lasts. Their month at the villa ended. But instead of returning to the compound, to the life that had nearly destroyed them, Damiano made a decision. I'm restructuring, he told Elena. Stepping back from the day-to-day operations. Marco will handle most of it. I'll still oversee the major decisions, but I won't be in the middle of every crisis anymore. Can you do that? She was skeptical. Just, let go. Not easily. But I've spent 18 years building an empire. It's time to let other people help run it. He pulled her close. I've realized something, Elena. I was so focused on protecting our future that I forgot to actually live in our present. That has to change. And if there's another crisis? Another Vitali? There will always be another crisis. Another threat. That's the nature of this world. His arms tightened around her. But I won't sacrifice us on the altar of protection anymore. I'll handle what I need to handle and then I'll come home. To you. Always. She tilted her head back to look at him. You really mean it. Every word. She kissed him, slow and deep and full of promise. Then let's go home. 2 months later, Elena stood in front of a mirror, adjusting the simple white dress she wore. It wasn't a wedding dress, not technically. They were already married. But today they were renewing their vows and she'd wanted something that marked the occasion. A knock at the door. Come in. Luciana Moretti, Damiano's mother, entered the room. At 66 she was still striking with elegant silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. You look beautiful, the older woman said. Thank you for being here. I know things have been complicated. Luciana moved to stand beside her, their reflections side by side in the mirror. My son has made many mistakes, but he has also made the right choice in loving you. She reached out to adjust Elena's necklace, a simple gold chain with a small ruby pendant that had belonged to Damiano's grandmother. I knew when I first met you that you were exactly what he needed. Someone who would see through the coldness to the man beneath. I almost gave up on him. But you didn't. Luciana's eyes met hers in the mirror. That's what matters. Not the almost. The didn't. She pressed a kiss to Elena's cheek. Now come. My son is waiting. And I've never seen him nervous before. I'd like to enjoy it. The ceremony was small. Just family, Luciana, Elena's sister, a handful of trusted friends. Marco stood beside Damiano as his best man, his scarred face softened by an uncharacteristic smile. They held the ceremony in the garden of the villa, where flowers bloomed in every color and the sea stretched endless behind them. As Elena walked toward Damiano, she saw the look on his face, the overwhelming love, the fierce protectiveness, the vulnerable hope. And she knew with absolute certainty that they were going to make it. When we first married, Damiano said, holding her hands in his, I made vows that I didn't know how to keep. I promised to cherish you, but I neglected you. I promised to protect you, but I put you in danger. I promised to love you above all else, but I let my work come first. His voice thickened with emotion. Today I make new vows. Real vows. Vows I will keep because I've finally understood what truly matters. He squeezed her hands. I vow to choose you. Every day in every decision you will come first. I vow to be present, not just physically but emotionally. To listen when you speak. To hold you when you cry. To laugh with you when the world is too heavy. Tears slipped down Elena's cheeks. I vow to be honest with you even when the truth is ugly. I vow to fight for us not just against our enemies but against my own worst instincts. And I vow to never ever take for granted the miracle of having you in my life. He lifted her hands to his lips. You are my home, Elena. You always have been. And I will spend the rest of my life proving that I deserve to come home to you. When it was Elena's turn, her voice was steady despite the tears. Damiano Moretti. The most infuriating, stubborn, impossible man I have ever loved. Quiet laughter rippled through the guests. When I married you, I knew who you were. I knew what your world demanded. And I thought love would be enough to survive it. She paused. I was wrong. Love isn't enough. Not by itself. It takes choice. Commitment. The willingness to fight even when you want to run. She held his gaze. I vow to choose you. Even when it's hard. Even when I'm scared. Even when every instinct tells me to protect myself by walking away. Her voice strengthened. I vow to be your partner, not just your wife but your equal. To stand beside you in the darkness and help you find the light. She reached up to cup his face. I vow to see you. All of you. The power and the vulnerability. The coldness and the warmth. The monster and the man. Her thumb traced his cheekbone. And I vow to love every part of you. Forever. When they kissed, the guests erupted in applause. But Elena barely heard them. All she knew was Damiano's arms around her, his heart beating against hers, and the absolute certainty that this time, they were going to get it right. That night, after the guests had gone and the villa was quiet, Damiano led Elena to the terrace. The moon hung full over the sea, painting the water in silver. In the distance she could hear the soft crash of waves against the cliffs. I have something for you, he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. We already have rings, she pointed out. This isn't a ring. He opened the box. Inside was a key. Elena frowned, confused. What's this? It's the key to a house in Tuscany. Small, quiet, far from everything. He closed her fingers around it. It's not connected to any of my business interests. No one in my world knows it exists. It's completely, entirely yours. Whine. If things ever become too much again, if you ever need space, need safety, need time, you have somewhere to go. No questions. No judgment. Just a place that belongs to you. Her throat tightened. You bought me an escape route? I bought you a choice. His eyes were intense, vulnerable. I never want you to feel trapped with me, Elena. I never want you to stay because you have nowhere else to go. If you're with me, I want it to be because you want to be. Every single day. She stared at the key in her hand, this small piece of metal that represented so much. Freedom, trust, respect, love. I don't want to escape you, she said softly. But thank you for understanding why I might need to know I could. She slipped the key into her pocket, then reached up to pull him down for a kiss. Take me to bed, she whispered against his lips. Your wish is my command. He swept her into his arms, carrying her through the terrace doors and into the villa, into their future, while the moonlight spilled across the sea behind them. And Elena Moretti knew with every fiber of her being that she was exactly where she was meant to be. 1 year later, Elena stood at the window of their bedroom, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. Behind her, Damiano was still asleep, his dark hair mussed against the pillow, his face relaxed in a way she rarely saw when he was awake. The tattoos on his arms were visible above the sheets. The gladiator, the cathedral, the roses. Symbols of everything he had been. And everything he was becoming. The past year hadn't been easy. There had been fights, some small, some explosive. There had been moments when old patterns threatened to resurface. When Damiano's phone would ring at dinner and Elena would see the familiar tension in his jaw, the pull of his empire demanding his attention. But he had kept his vows. Every single time he had chosen her. And slowly, painstakingly, they had rebuilt what had been broken. Elena's hand drifted to her stomach, resting there with a tenderness that had become instinctive over the past few weeks. She hadn't told him yet. Hadn't found the right moment, the right words. But today felt like the day. She heard him stir behind her, the rustle of sheets as he reached for her side of the bed and found it empty. Elena. His voice was rough with sleep, tinged with the faintest edge of alarm. Even after a year he still woke reaching for her, still needed to know she was close. I'm here. She turned from the window, smiling at the sight of him, this powerful, dangerous man, rumpled and vulnerable in the early morning light. I'm right here. He relaxed, pushing himself up against the headboard. His steel-gray eyes tracked her movement as she crossed the room, taking in her silk robe, her loose hair, the soft smile on her lips. You're up early. Couldn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed, facing him. I was thinking. About. She took a breath. This was it. About how much has changed. About who we were a year ago and who we are now. Her hand found his, their fingers intertwining. About the future. Something shifted in his expression. Curiosity maybe, or the first stirrings of hope. What about the future? Elena lifted his hand and placed it on her stomach. For a moment he didn't understand. She could see the confusion in his eyes, the question forming on his lips. The realization. His entire body went still. Elena. Her name came out strangled, barely a whisper. Are you? Yes. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she was smiling, beaming, unable to contain the joy that had been building inside her for weeks. I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby. Damiano stared at her. In 15 years, Marco had never seen his boss speechless. In 39 years of life, Damiano himself had never been at a loss for words. He had negotiated with kingpins, faced down assassins, buried friends and enemies alike without flinching. But this brought him to his knees. Literally. He slid off the bed and knelt before her, his hands trembling as they cradled her stomach with impossible gentleness. His forehead pressed against her belly and his shoulders began to shake. Damiano. Elena's fingers threaded through his hair. Damiano, are you? I never thought. His voice broke. After everything I've done. Everything I am. I never thought I deserved. He couldn't finish. She pulled him up, pulling him into her arms, holding him as he wept against her shoulder. This man who had made empires tremble. This man who had faced death without blinking. This man who had spent his entire life believing he was too broken, too dark, too dangerous to deserve something as pure as a family. You deserve this, she whispered fiercely. You deserve happiness. You deserve love. And our child is going to have the most devoted, protective, loving father in the world. He pulled back, his steel-gray eyes red-rimmed but blazing with an intensity that took her breath away. I will protect them. The words were a vow, carved from the very core of his being. I will protect both of you with everything I have. Everything I am. I will be there for every moment, every milestone, every struggle, every joy. I will not miss a single second. I know. She cupped his face, wiping the tears from his cheeks. I know you will. He kissed her then, deep and desperate and full of a love so overwhelming it felt like drowning. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers, his hands still cradling her stomach. How long have you known? A few weeks. I wanted to be sure before I told you. A few weeks. He laughed softly, shakily. You kept this secret for a few weeks? It was hard. He grinned. You have no idea how many times I almost blurted it out. Why didn't you? Because I wanted it to be perfect. She looked around the room, their room in the villa where they had rebuilt their marriage. I wanted to tell you here. Where everything changed. His eyes softened. Everything did change here. You gave me another chance when I didn't deserve one. You stayed when any sane person would have run. His thumb traced circles on her stomach. And now you're giving me this. A family. A future. We're giving each other a future, she corrected. This isn't just my gift to you, Damiano. It's ours. Something we built together. He nodded slowly, absorbing the truth of her words. We built this together, he repeated. And we'll raise this child together. No matter what comes. No matter what comes. They sat there as the sun rose higher, wrapped in each other's arms, dreaming of the future they had almost lost. And outside the window the sea stretched endless and blue, full of possibility, full of promise, full of hope. The news spread quickly through the family. Luciana wept with joy when they told her, embracing Elena with a fierce tenderness that surprised them both. Finally, she whispered. Finally a grandchild. I had begun to lose hope. Marco, ever stoic, simply nodded when Damiano told him, but Elena caught the suspicious brightness in his eyes before he turned away. You're going to be an uncle, Damiano told him. I expect you to spoil this child completely. Already planning on it. Elena's sister flew in from Milan, arriving with 3 suitcases full of baby supplies despite the fact that Elena was barely showing. It's never too early to prepare, she insisted, spreading tiny onesies across the guest bed. Besides, do you have any idea how fast these months are going to fly by? He was right. The months did fly by. Elena's body changed, her belly growing round with the life inside her. Damiano was there for everything. Every doctor's appointment, every ultrasound, every midnight craving that sent him to the kitchen at 3 a.m. searching for pickles and ice cream. This is disgusting, he informed her, watching her eat the combination with evident satisfaction. This is delicious. And necessary. Our child has questionable taste. Our child has excellent taste. They get it from me. He laughed. A real laugh, warm and unreserved, and kissed the top of her head. These moments had become frequent over the past months. Laughter. Teasing. The easy intimacy of 2 people who had fought their way back to each other and emerged stronger for it. But there were harder moments too. One night, Elena woke to find the bed empty. She found Damiano on the terrace, staring out at the moonlit sea. His shoulders were tense, his hands gripping the railing so hard his knuckles were white. Damiano. He didn't turn. Go back to bed, Elena. You need rest. Not without you. She moved to stand beside him, pulling her robe tighter against the chill. What's wrong? For a long moment he didn't answer. Then, I keep thinking about my father. The words hung in the air like smoke. Elena knew the stories. Damiano rarely spoke of his childhood, but she had pieced together enough over the years to understand. A father who was cold. Brutal. A man who saw his son as a successor, not a child. Who taught him to lead through fear and control through power. What about him? He never held me. Never told me he loved me. Never, Damiano's voice cracked. I don't remember a single moment of warmth from him. Not one. Damiano. What if I'm like him? The question burst out of him raw and anguished. What if I look at our child and feel nothing? What if the coldness in me, the violence, what if I pass that on? Elena felt her heart crack. She had wondered when this fear would surface. Had known it was lurking beneath the joy, the excitement, the preparations for their future. Damiano had spent his entire life believing he was his father's son. Believing that darkness was hereditary, inevitable. She took his hands, pulling them from the railing, forcing him to face her. Look at me. His steel-gray eyes met hers and she saw the terror there, deeper than anything he'd ever shown her. You are not your father. Her voice was fierce, unwavering. You are a man who learned the wrong lessons as a child and has spent his entire adult life trying to unlearn them. You are a man who chose love even when he didn't know how to express it. A man who walked through fire to become better. But, no. She squeezed his hands. Listen to me. I have seen you with children, Damiano. Marco's nieces. The staff's families. You light up around them. You get down on their level. You ask them questions like their answers actually matter. That's different. It's not different. It's who you are. She pressed his hand to her belly where their child was awake and kicking. Feel that? That's our baby. And they are going to know, from the very first moment they draw breath, that their father loves them. Unconditionally. Completely. With everything he has. Damiano's hand trembled against her stomach. How can you be so sure? Because I know you. She stepped closer, wrapping her arms around him. I know the man you are beneath the power and the fear. I know how deeply you love, how fiercely you protect. And I know that the moment you hold our child for the first time, all those fears are going to disappear. He held her tight, his face buried in her hair. What if they don't? Then I'll be there to remind you. She pulled back to look at him. That's what partners do. We carry each other through the darkness. You've done it for me. Let me do it for you. For a long moment he just stared at her. This woman who had seen him at his worst and loved him anyway. Who had almost died because of his world, yet chosen to stay. Who was carrying his child and looking at him like he was worthy of all of it. I don't deserve you, he whispered. Probably not. A small smile curved her lips. But you're stuck with me anyway. He laughed, a wet, broken sound, and pulled her close. Thank God for that. They stood there until the moon set and the first light of dawn touched the horizon. And when they finally went back to bed, Damiano slept without dreams for the first time in weeks. 8 months into the pregnancy, Elena went into labor 3 weeks early. It happened fast, too fast. One moment she was fine, sitting in the garden reading a book. The next she was doubled over, gasping, her hands clutching her belly as contractions ripped through her. Damiano. He was there in seconds, his face white with terror. The baby, Elena gasped. It's coming. He didn't waste time with words. He swept her into his arms and carried her to the car, barking orders into his phone as he ran. Driver. Hospital. Dr. Romano. No. The ride to St. Gabriel was a blur of pain and fear. Elena gripped Damiano's hand so hard she thought she might break his fingers, but he didn't flinch. Didn't complain. Just held her and murmured reassurances that she could barely hear over the roaring in her ears. 3 weeks early. 3 weeks early. The words echoed in her mind like a death knell. She's going to be okay, Damiano said, reading her fear. Our baby's going to be okay. We got through worse than this. We can get through anything. They arrived at the hospital in record time. Dr. Romano was waiting at the entrance, her face calm and professional as she directed them to a delivery room. The next 6 hours were the longest of Elena's life. She pushed. She screamed. She swore at Damiano in 3 languages. Italian, English, and some creative combinations that made even the nurses blush. He never left her side. Not for a second. He held her hand through every contraction. Wiped the sweat from her forehead. Told her she was strong, she was brave, she was incredible. And when their daughter finally emerged, red-faced and screaming, with a shock of dark hair and her father's steel-gray eyes, Damiano Moretti broke. Not with fear. Not with pain. Joy. She's perfect, he breathed, watching as the nurses cleaned the tiny body and placed her in Elena's arms. By God, Elena, she's perfect. Elena couldn't speak, could barely see through her tears. All she could do was hold this tiny, miraculous creature and marvel at what they had created. Their daughter. Their future. Their hope. What should we name her? Elena whispered. Damiano reached out, his tattooed finger tracing the baby's cheek with impossible gentleness. Lucia, he said softly. After my grandmother. She was the only person in my childhood who showed me what love could look like. Lucia. Elena smiled, watching their daughter's eyes flutter closed. Lucia Moretti. It's beautiful. She's beautiful. Damiano's voice was thick with emotion. Like her mother. He leaned down and pressed a kiss to Elena's forehead, then another to Lucia's tiny brow. Thank you, he murmured. For choosing me. For staying. For giving me everything I never knew I needed. Elena reached up to touch his face, tracing the familiar lines, the stubble, the barely visible tattoo on his neck. Thank you for fighting for us, she replied. For becoming the man I always knew you could be. He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. I'm still fighting, he said. I'll never stop. I know. She pulled him down for a kiss. That's why I love you. 3 months later, Elena stood in the nursery of the villa, watching Damiano rock their daughter to sleep. He was singing. Actually singing. A soft Italian lullaby that his grandmother had sung to him decades ago. His voice was rough, unpracticed, slightly off-key. It was the most beautiful thing Elena had ever heard. Lucia's eyes were already closing, her tiny fist wrapped around her father's finger. She had him completely wrapped around that finger and everyone knew it. The most feared mafia boss in Italy turned into a melted puddle of adoration the moment his daughter looked at him. She's asleep, Damiano whispered, carefully lowering her into the crib. Has been for the past 10 minutes, Elena replied with a smile. You just didn't want to put her down. He had the grace to look slightly sheepish. Can you blame me? Not even a little. They stood side by side, watching their daughter sleep. This perfect, innocent life they had created together. I've been thinking, Damiano said quietly. About the business. The empire. He turned to look at her. I want to step back further. Eventually step away entirely. Elena's eyebrows rose. You'd give up the organization? Not give up. Transfer. To Marco and the council. He reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face. I've spent my entire life building something that almost cost me everything that mattered. I don't want Lucia to grow up the way I did, surrounded by danger, knowing her father might not come home. Damiano. It won't happen overnight. It might take years to do it properly. But I want to try. His eyes searched hers. Would that be okay? She laughed, a wet, joyful sound, and threw her arms around him. Okay? Damiano, it's everything I ever hoped for. She pulled back to look at him. But are you sure? This has been your whole life. No. He shook his head, pulling her close. You're my whole life. You and Lucia. Everything else is just noise. She kissed him then, slow and deep, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. When they finally broke apart, they were both smiling. So, Elena said, what does retirement look like for a mafia boss? I have no idea. He grinned. But I'm looking forward to finding out. With you. They turned back to watch their daughter sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by the peace they had fought so hard to earn. 5 years later, the villa on the coast had transformed. The gardens that Elena had always loved were now filled with the sound of children's laughter. Lucia, 5 years old, with her father's dark hair and her mother's warm eyes, chased her 3-year-old brother through the flowers, both of them shrieking with joy. Marco sat on the terrace, pretending to read a book while actually keeping a watchful eye on his honorary niece and nephew. The scar over his eyebrow had faded slightly with time, and there were streaks of gray in his dark hair, but his protective instincts were as sharp as ever. Luciana had moved into the villa's guest wing 2 years ago, claiming she was too old to maintain her own house. Everyone knew she simply couldn't bear to be away from her grandchildren. She sat beside Marco now, offering unsolicited commentary on his reading material. That book is trash. It's a classic. Classically boring. Elena watched them from the kitchen window, smiling as she prepared lunch. The past 5 years had been the happiest of her life, filled with love and laughter, challenges and triumphs, the messy, beautiful chaos of raising a family. Arms wrapped around her from behind. "What are you looking at?" Damiano murmured against her ear. "Our life." She leaned back against him. "It's pretty amazing." "It is." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Though I think Lucia has inherited your stubborn streak." "My stubborn streak?" "She gets that from you." "I'm not stubborn. I'm determined." "That's what stubborn people say." He laughed, spinning her around to face him. At 44 he had softened slightly, a few gray hairs at his temples, laugh lines around his eyes. But he was still devastatingly handsome, and he still looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For everything." He kissed her forehead. "For not giving up on me. For fighting for us. For building this life with me. We built it together." She reached up to touch his face. "That's what we promised, remember? To choose each other. Every day." "Every day," he agreed. "And I'll keep choosing you. For the rest of our lives." Outside, Lucia's delighted scream pierced the air as her brother caught her with a tackle that sent them both tumbling into the grass. "Papa. Marco won't play fair." "Mama. Lucia started it." Elena and Damiano exchanged a look. The kind of look that parents everywhere understood. The look that said, "This is chaos. This is exhausting. This is perfect." "Duty calls," Damiano said with a sigh. "Go save our children from each other. I'll finish lunch." He kissed her once more, quick but full of promise, and headed for the terrace. Elena watched him go. This man who had once been the most feared figure in Italy. This man who had almost lost her. Who had fought through hell and back to become the husband and father he'd never believed he could be. He reached the garden and scooped both children into his arms, one on each side, their protests dissolving into giggles as he spun them around. "I've got you," he told them, his voice carrying through the open window. "I've always got you." Elena's eyes filled with tears, happy tears, the only kind she cried these days. Because this was their life. Imperfect. Complicated. Messy. But filled with more love than she had ever imagined possible. And as she watched her husband play with their children in the garden of the villa where they had rebuilt their marriage, Elena Moretti knew one thing with absolute certainty. The most feared man in Italy had become the most devoted family man she had ever known. And she would spend the rest of her life grateful that she had been the one to see who he truly was. Beneath the power. Beneath the fear. Beneath the walls he'd built to protect himself. There had always been a man worth fighting for. And she had fought for him. And he had fought for her. And together they had won. The end. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment letting me know your favorite moment. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of love, redemption, and second chances. Until next time.